serve to be excluded from the gridlock that this will invariably cause. Let's come together once more and adopt this amendment, Mr. Chair, not just for the troops that need help now, but for the troops that will be here in the near future. And I reserve the balance of my time.
This time is reserved. Purpose is gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition.
I oppose the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I respect my friend from Wisconsin with whom I worked on numerous pieces of legislation related to child homelessness and affordable housing. But in this case, I'm going to respectfully disagree with the premise of the legislation. As a veteran, as a former Army Ranger, as a flight commander of an assault helicopter unit in 82nd Airborne Division, and who served in the Middle East, the one thing that I would say is that nothing in the REINS Act would in any way inhibit or impede the delivery of services to our veterans, of whom I have been a champion in my time in Congress on numerous pieces of legislation. What I would say is the REINS Act would provide a framework for discussion were there a rule to arise that hit that cost threshold to assure crisp, clear improvement, particularly in dealing with backlogs. When we deal with the VA specifically, I have had area managers of the Veterans Administration point out specific rules that cause increased queuing and waiting time that were not being addressed. This amendment would actually prevent us from being able to address such things were they to hit the threshold. The amendment carves out all regulations that affects veterans and veteran affairs out of the REINS Act for congressional approval procedures, and frankly, REINS Act supporters honor America's veterans. We have had America's veterans speaking in favor of this bill throughout the afternoon. And I believe that ultimately we are going to make decisions that will be in keeping with the will of the American people and in the best interest of those veterans as we move forward. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentlelady from Wisconsin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the gentleman for responding, even though he doesn't agree with me. You know, I'm just looking at about at least 14 rules that have been implemented very expeditiously on behalf of our veterans since September 11th. And it is chilling to think about the delays that may be caused by an extra process. And with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Thank you. That's a point that the gentlewoman and I will agree to disagree on. I believe that we have seen the Congress move in an expedited manner in national security in dealing with our veterans, and there would be no difference under this legislation. Ultimately, we know that Congress must approve all legislation relating to every agency of the federal government, and we'll be doing our constitutional duty, and as I remind everybody listening, to restore transparency, accountability, and a check and balance so our citizens and our voters can hold somebody in the government accountable instead of faceless bureaucrats. It's a solution that everyone should support. Congress will be more accountable. I ask all of my colleagues to oppose this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Wisconsin. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chair, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Wisconsin will be postponed.
That announces the slate, and then this will launch the first vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in the Congressional record on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 2, offered by Mr. Johnson of Georgia. Amendment number 3, offered by Mr. Schrader of Oregon. Amendment number 5, offered by Ms. McCarthy of New York. Amendment number 6, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas. And amendment number 7, offered by Ms. Moore of Wisconsin. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311 by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-311, offered by Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
Earlier today in the House, they passed several motions relating to 2012 spending for military construction and Veterans Affairs, and also relating to the Defense Authorization Bill. For the last couple of hours, they've been debating a bill that would require congressional approval of all federal regulation with an annual economic cost of $100 million or more. They debated the bill. They debated 7 amendments to that bill, and 5 of those amendments getting roll call votes. This first one by Hank Johnson of Georgia. This is an amendment which would exempt any rule that the Congressional Budget Office determines would result in net job creation from the congressional approval process. This is a 15-minute vote, and then there will be votes following that, amendment votes following that, which will all be 2-minute votes. Also today in Washington at the Pentagon, the commander in charge of troop withdrawal in Iraq is calling those who served there in Iraq the, quote, next greatest generation. At the briefing today, Lieutenant General Frank Helmick told reporters he's proud of the work done by U.S. forces and confident the Iraqi military will maintain order after the withdrawal is complete later this month. He joined reporters at the Pentagon. He was in Iraq. This briefing is about 40 minutes, and we'll show you a good bit of it during this first vote here on the House floor.
I'd like to welcome to the Pentagon briefing room for the first time Lieutenant General Frank Helmick, the Deputy Commanding General of Operations for U.S. Forces, Iraq. General Helmick has served in Iraq during 3 campaigns. He was the Assistant Division Commander of the 101st Airborne Division during the initial 2003 invasion. He subsequently served as the commander of the Multinational Security Transition Command in Iraq from 2008 to 2009. During that tour, he was responsible for recruiting, training, equipping, and sustaining the Iraqi military and police forces. Today, as Deputy Commanding General of Operations for USFI, he is responsible for the oversight of stability and redeployment security operations as USFI completely transfers the training and advising functions of the U.S. mission in Iraq by the end of the year. At this time, I'll turn the microphone over to General Helmick for his opening statement, and then we'll come back to Washington to take your questions. And with that, General, over to you.
Well, good morning from Baghdad, Iraq. I'd like to thank all of the media in attendance today, and I appreciate this opportunity to update the American people about our men and women in uniform bravely serving in support of Operation New Dawn. With less than 1 month remaining, we are poised to complete our mission to successfully honor the terms of the 2008 security agreement between our government and the government of Iraq. The significance of this day, December 7th, does not escape me. For today marks the 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. That infamous day and the attacks on 9/11 galvanized our nation. While World War II is credited for spawning the greatest generation, I believe over the course of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn, America discovered the next greatest generation. Words cannot begin to describe the pride I feel about America's military performance and service in Iraq. What I hope to accomplish today is answer what I believe are the 3 burning questions people have with regards to U.S. troop presence in Iraq. Number 1, what is the status of our redeployment efforts? Number 2, are the Iraqi security forces ready? And number 3, has this war in Iraq been worth the sacrifice by the United States? First of all, let me talk about the drawdown. The magnitude and scale of what we're doing here in Iraq is simply historic. We just didn't begin this a few months ago. We began this drawdown 18 months ago. But to kind of give you a frame of reference of what we had to deal with, I have to go back to 2007 and illustrate the magnitude of the challenge that faced us. For example, we were responsible, and still are today, the security of the nation. And Iraq is about the size of California. In 2007, the number of uniformed personnel, civilian DOD personnel and contractors was about 300,000, all those combined. That equates to the size of the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, the population of Cincinnati. Today in the country, we have 8,000 military in only 5,000 contractors. Back in 2007, we occupied 505 bases dotted around the country. If you put those bases together, that size equates to the size of San Jose, California. Today, we have about 5 bases, no, not about, we have 5 bases that we're responsible for, and if you put those bases together, it's the size of the Bronx in New York City. Now, since we have really made this effort a priority about 18 months ago, we have moved a mountain of equipment, personnel throughout the country, and our drivers have driven over 16 million miles. And that equates to about 482 times around the earth. So this reposture effort has been a deliberate effort, has been operationally focused. It's been done very, very quietly and in a professional manner. Question 2, are the Iraqi security forces ready? As was mentioned in the introduction, this is my 3rd time in Iraq. I was here early on in 2003 with the 101st Airborne Division. And during that time, the Iraqis did not have an army. They did not have a navy. They did not have an air force. So we didn't rebuild anything. We built their military. And we helped professionalize and build the Iraqi police, because they did have some Iraqi police forces. They didn't have a special operations forces. Today they do, which, by the way, are the best in the region. Today there are about 700,000 Iraqi security forces in country. That's their Army, their Navy, their Air Force, their Marine Corps, and all the different police forces to include the federal police forces. About 700,000 total. They are equipped with some very, very good equipment. Much of that equipment is United States equipment and some of the best we have. For example, the M1 tank, some of our artillery pieces are different types of personnel equipment for their soldiers. And they've taken charge of operations. Since 2010, the Iraqis have been in the lead in operations for the internal defense of their country. There are challenges, external security threats, Iranian-backed militias, Al-Qaeda, other violent extremist organizations, that the Iraqis must continue to put constant pressure on those groups. Lingering ethnic tensions, Sunni, Shia, Arab-Kurd relations aren't what they need to be. And the Iraqis continue to work on that as well. And the government still is not completely formed. As you know, the elections occurred in March of 2010, and we still do not have a permanent Minister of Defense or a Minister of the Interior. The Prime Minister is heading up both of those organizations. We do have an acting Minister of Defense. And then there are still some security gaps that exist. Their air sovereignty, their air defense capability, the ability to protect the 2 oil platforms, and then the ability to do combined armed operations for an external defense, synchronizing their infantry with their armor, with their artillery, with their engineers. They're not quite there with that capability. 3rd question, has it been worth it? That is a personal question that if you ask a number of soldiers that have served here, number of Marines that have served here, any member of the service that have served here, or the Iraqis, for example, you may get a different answer. But from where I sit, I have to say it was. We enabled and facilitated elections. We built a military. Violence in Iraq is at an all-time low. In 2007, as I mentioned at the height, we had 1,600 attacks a week in this country. against the United States, against Iraqi security forces, and against the Iraqis themselves. Today, we have less than 50 attacks per week. And we provided the Iraqis an opportunity for a sovereign country to choose their way ahead. And I just have to cite two other reasons why I think it has been worth it. And one is when I was back at Fort Bragg, I had an opportunity to attend some funerals for soldiers that have died in Iraq or killed in action. And I went to one funeral, and the father whose son had been killed in Iraq came up to me and said, "General, thank you." And I thought he was thanking me for representing the Chief of Staff of the Army at the ceremony, but that wasn't the case. Because I asked him why was he thanking me. And he said, "Thank you because you allowed my son to do what he loved to do, and that was to be a soldier." Another example of why it's been worth it for me is there is a program called Operation New Exit, where we bring a select group of service members back to Iraq who had to be evacuated because of injuries. And till the day I died, there is a Marine who was on one of those events that came back here, Operation New Exit program that came back here, a double amputee, and he was blind. And he said to me, "General, I had to come back here. I had to leave here and get closure in a proper way. Because, you know, General, I wouldn't do anything differently." So, for those reasons, I have to say for me, this has been a worthy endeavor. So with that opening comment, let me take your questions.
General, thank you very much, and we'll go ahead and take questions from the Pentagon. Mike.
General, it's Mike Evans from the Times of London here. Because of your experience and the fact that you were there in 2003 as well as currently, what do you think are the main lessons that the American military have learnt from their campaign in Iraq in terms of development and doctrine and all that?
Well, number one, Mike, thanks for that question. Our military is an incredible organization. We have performed really beyond expectation in my mind. And I've seen it again early on, steady state, and now at the end. Early on, our military did things that they weren't trained to do. We weren't very good at being advisor to some farmers that were trying to harvest wheat, but we did that. We weren't very good about how do you talk to a refinery manager on how to improve his processes in a oil refinery that was dotted around the country, but we did that. We weren't very good about oil distribution, benzene distribution for the country of Iraq early on, but we did that. So the military had to branch out through all different portions of a government sector and take lead, because at that time, early on, there wasn't anybody to hand the ball off to. Since then, the Department of State, USAID, other countries have come online, and this integration, the synchronization of the interagency is a big lesson that we've learned. If anyone wants to see how the interagency is supposed to work, come to Iraq and see how it works now between the United States Embassy and the United States Forces Iraq. That's one lesson we've learned. Number two, I've learned that the United States military is absolutely phenomenal. I scratch my head every day and find out where we get the people who volunteer in our military. Their talents have no bounds, really, to be honest. Any mission, any time, with a positive attitude. And then number three, I think we've learned about the culture of this country. Early on, I think we thought the only way to do things was the way we did in America. But we found out that wasn't the case. We need to enable the processes and procedures in some cases of Iraq and not have them templated on an American system. We need to enable the Iraqi system. So those are three things I would say I take away from this and what we've learned.
Hi, General. It's Courtney Cubey from NBC News. One quick question about your opening statement. When you said that the U.S. military has driven more than 16 million miles, just to be clear, do you mean that was over the last 18 months, or is that just in this most recent increase in the number of drawdown? And then on another note, recently there was a warning from the embassy there in Baghdad that they called a severe risk of kidnapping within the international zone. What do you attribute that to? And can you talk a little bit about, have there been any specific incidents recently that have brought on this warning?
Yeah, Courtney, the data that I have is 16 million miles just in the last 18 months, to answer that piece of it. And the second piece you talked about is kidnapping, the warning and threat of kidnapping. We have some intelligence that could indicate that there is a possibility for one of the Iranian-backed militias to do kidnapping in and around Iraq. So as a prudent military and the embassy personnel as well, we've shared this information with each other, and we've just taken the appropriate precautions as we move in and around the IZ and in and around Iraq.
General Tom Bowman with NPR. Could you just do a little cleanup on what's left to do so far? You said you have 8,000 soldiers there. You know, how much more equipment do you have to take out? How many trucks do you expect to head to Kuwait? And also talk about what's being left behind. How much equipment, how much stuff do the Iraqis want?
Well, as I mentioned, we have 8,000 soldiers that remain inside the country. We're on glide path to get it done in accordance with the security agreement of that says we'll have to be out of here by 31 December, and we will do that. The number of truckloads, I think, is less than 1,000 right now, and that's really, we are in very, very good shape for the number of truckloads of equipment. We have a very, very deliberate plan, a very, very detailed process of how we go about doing that. As far as the equipment that's being left behind, I have to tell you that every piece of equipment that is left here goes through an agonizing process to determine, number one, can we legally leave it here? Does it enhance the security acceleration capability for the Iraqi security forces? Is it more cost effective to leave here, or is it more cost effective to take it with us and ship it either to Afghanistan or back to the United States? Rest assured that every piece of equipment that we leave here has been through that process, and there are thousands of pieces of equipment that are here. And rest assured that the American people can sleep okay at night, because we've gone through a very, very deliberate, well thought out process to make sure that America's taxpayers' money has been spent wisely. As a matter of fact, there is a significant savings on transportation costs alone by making the decision to leave some of this equipment here.
Give us a range of the equipment that you are leaving behind, and then just give us a range of what you would not leave, what you would be taking out.
Yeah, for example, we would leave a desk and a chair Flat screen TV in some cases we would leave here. What we wouldn't leave here is any type of armored equipment, any type of military vehicle, any type of ammunition. All of that will be sent back to the United States or, if required, sent to Afghanistan.
Hi, General. Justin Fischel with Fox News. As you know, Vice President Biden just got back from Baghdad, and during a meeting there with Prime Minister Maliki, he talked about working on a security arrangement in the future that could involve U.S. assistance. Do you believe the Iraqis will want more assistance, and is there a feeling there amongst military leadership that you could be leaving more responsibly with at least some small force presence, leaving that behind?
Yeah, Jeff, thanks for that question. The Vice President did come here last week. I thought it was a great visit. He was here really to attend a ceremony where the Iraqis thanked us for all we have done for this country. But also he was here to chair, as a co-chair for the Strategic Framework, the High Committee of the Strategic Framework Agreement. As you well know, Jeff, there are two guiding documents that we have used in this country since 2008. Number one is the Security Agreement. That has an expiration date of 31 December 2011, where it states all U.S. forces will leave Iraq. Number two is a Strategic Framework Agreement. This is more of a Department of State lead. In the Strategic Framework Agreement, it talks about relationships between the United States and the government of Iraq, specifically economic development, educational development, cultural development, environmental development, agricultural type things, but also embedded in that is a clause that talks about security cooperation. Security cooperation is one of the mill-to-mill agreements that the Central Command with General Mattis will propose to the government of Iraq. And embedded in that are things, for example, possible exercise exchanges, port calls with Navy ships down at Qasr, those type of mill-to-mill agreements. And the sensing that I get from the Iraqis that I deal with, they want to have a strong relationship with our government. They are a sovereign country, and they want to make sure that their relationship with the United States becomes stronger in the future.
So,
sir, this is...
Well. So are you ready for the next question?
This is Joe Thabit with Al-Hurra. I want to go back to your opening statement. You have talked about the readiness of the Iraqi forces. Can you give us an idea, or if you could emphasize, if the Iraqi forces of if the Iraqi forces, or if Iraq has the capability to defend its air sovereignty?
I think your question is, again, you're broken up. Let me make sure I understand.
On this vote, the yeas are 186, the nays are 236.
Mr. Connolly of Virginia. Mr. Connolly of Virginia votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 187, the nays are 236. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311, by the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Schrader, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-311, offered by Mr. Schrader of Oregon.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
And it's the second of 5 amendment votes to a bill that would require congressional approval of certain executive branch regulations. This one's a 2-minute vote. Writing about the debate earlier today, the Associated Press says the chief Republican sponsor of the bill, Representative Jeff Davis of Kentucky, complained that the administration was using regulations as an end around Congress to obtain what it can't get from the GOP-run House. Meanwhile, the White House said the bill before the House today would, quote, throw all major regulations into a months-long limbo. They write that while Republicans insist the bill would help businesses by giving them cost savings to create jobs, the White House said the legislation would be, quote, impeding business investment. They also said that his senior advisors in the budget office at the White House would advise the president veto the bill should it be passed here and through the Senate.
The yeas are 183, the nays are 238. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 5, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311 by the gentlelady from New York, Ms. McCarthy, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 5, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-311, offered by Mrs. McCarthy of New York.
The recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The underlying House bill would require congressional approval of federal regulations with an annual economic cost of more than $100 million. Two-minute vote here, the third of 5 amendment votes. Carolyn McCarthy offering an amendment to exempt any regulatory proposals relating to food safety, workplace safety, air quality, consumer product safety, or water quality.
Are 177, the nays are 246. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311 by the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-311, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The House working its way through 5 amendment votes on a bill that would require congressional approval of certain executive branch regulations. This is Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas with an amendment which would exempt any regulation issued by the Homeland Security Department. Another 2-minute vote, one more after this. Earlier today, the House passed a couple of motions relating to the Military Construction Veterans Affairs spending bill for fiscal year 2012. That'll be the vehicle for tomorrow's appropriations, the joint conference tomorrow, the House and Senate conference meeting, with House Appropriations Chairman Hal Rogers announcing that the joint conference will be held tomorrow morning at 10:30 Eastern, and we can tell you we will have live coverage of that tomorrow on cspan.org.
The ayes are 177, the nays are 242. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311 by the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-311, offered by Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
This is the last amendment vote on a bill that would require congressional approval of certain federal regulations. Gwen Moore's amendment would exempt regulations coming from Veterans Affairs. This is a 2-minute vote. Motion to recommit is likely next and final passage, and the House will move on to debate on a bill that would bar the sale of some synthetic drugs. That's all ahead. Also on Capitol Hill today, Congressional Quarterly reporting the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations voted 15-0 to subpoena New Jersey Democrat John Corzine to testify at their December 15th hearing. That's the third Congressional committee that's going to hear from the former senator and former New Jersey governor. He will also be testifying tomorrow before the House Agriculture Committee, and that will get underway at 9:30 Eastern. C-SPAN cameras will be covering that event tomorrow on Capitol Hill.
On this vote, the yeas are 183, the nays are 240. The amendment is not adopted. There being no further amendments under the rule, the committee rises.
Right down here. There's a microphone right here.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has under consideration H.R. 10, and pursuant to the House Resolution 479, I report the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House with a further amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair Committee, the whole House on the State of the Union, reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 10, and pursuant to House Resolution 479, reports the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House with a full amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code to provide that major rules of the executive branch shall have no force or effect unless a joint resolution of approval is enacted into law.
Mr. Speaker.
The House will be in order. Would all members please take their conversations from the floor, clear the aisles and the well. Let the House be in order. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Connecticut rise?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlelady opposed to the bill?
I am opposed in its current form.
Gentlelady qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. DeLauro of Connecticut moves to recommit the bill H.R. 10 to the Committee on the Judiciary with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendments. Page 45, line 22, insert after the first period the following. Section 808, protection of food safety and consumers' right to know through country of origin labeling. Sections 801 through 807 of this chapter, as amended by the regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2011, shall not apply in the case of any rule regarding country of origin labeling. This chapter, as in effect before the enactment of the regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2011, shall continue to apply after such enactment to any such rule as appropriate.
House will be in order. Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to offer a motion that would exempt country of origin labeling from the regulations affected by this legislation. This is the final amendment to the bill, which will not kill it or send it back to committee. Instead, we will move to final passage on the bill as amended. We have had a heated debate over this act. I have very strong concerns about it, but however one feels about the legislation before us, we should all be able to agree on fundamental principles. First, that it is the responsibility of this institution and of government to see that the health and the safety of American families are protected. This includes protecting Americans from unsafe and contaminated food. And second, the consumer should be able to know where the food and products they buy come from so that they can make informed decisions about their purchases, as they should be able to in a free market. That is what country of origin labeling does, and it is why my final amendment simply exempts country of origin labeling from the underlying bill before us. It gives us an opportunity to come together in a bipartisan way to protect the health and safety of our constituents and to give the American public the information.
The lady will suspend. Let the House be in order. Gentlelady may proceed.
It will give the American public the information they need and clearly want to make informed decisions for their families. More than 40 other countries we trade with have a country of origin labeling system in place, and the majority of American consumers continue to support country of origin labeling. We know that foodborne illnesses are a major public health threat. They account for roughly 48 million illnesses, 100,000 hospitalizations, and over 3,000 deaths in this country every year. Every year, 1 in every 6 Americans become sick from the food that they eat. Our youngest and oldest Americans are the most vulnerable to these illnesses, and right now, roughly 80% of the seafood and 60% of the fruits and vegetables consumed in the United States have been produced outside of our borders. Amid all this imported food, our ability to ensure that food products are safe and not contaminated is dwindling. The FDA inspects less than 2% of the imported food in its jurisdiction. Yet, 70% of apple juice we drink was produced in China. Roughly 90% of the shrimp that we eat was produced outside of the United States. Across this 2%, the FDA finds frighteningly large numbers of shipments with dangerous food safety violations, including the presence of pathogens and chemical contamination. Families should be able to know where their food is coming from. Just this morning, a Japanese food producer announced the recall of 400,000 cans of infant formula after traces of radioactive cesium were found in the company's milk powder. And after the Fukushima disaster earlier this year, Americans were concerned about the safety of seafood imports. I do not want to single out any one country. Sadly, foodborne disease outbreaks are frighteningly normal both here and abroad. We recently experienced a listeria outbreak in cantaloupes, which sickened at least 139 people and killed 29 more. Germany saw an E. coli crisis this summer that killed dozens and sickened thousands. In 2010, we saw a salmonella outbreak in crushed pepper that sickened 272 people, another salmonella outbreak that resulted in the recall of over 500 million eggs and almost 2,000 Americans becoming ill. Country of origin labeling does not lead to American job losses or bankrupt the food industry. It simply lets consumers know where their food comes from. That is particularly important in this economy, when not only food inspectors but food producers are stretched thin. Consumers should be able to know when they are buying foods that were grown, raised, or produced right here in America. They have the right to know where their food was produced and to make their own choices about the food that they buy. In the past, there has been a bipartisan consensus that country of origin labeling is a good idea, that it keeps families safe, and that it supports American farmers. In fact, the chairman, my counterpart on the Labor HHS Education Appropriations Subcommittee, Congressman Rehberg of Montana, has been a leader in ensuring strong country of origin labeling. We should continue that bipartisan recommitment today, exempt country of origin labeling from the REINS Act. I urge my colleagues, stand up for public health and the consumer's right to know and American businesses, and support this final amendment.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Let's do it.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This motion is a distraction. It misses the point of this legislation entirely. We are here today to restore accountability for the regulations with the biggest impact on our economy. Good, bad, or ugly, and our regulatory code includes all three. Congress should be accountable for regulations that cost the American people $100 million or more annually. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman's correct. The House is not in order. Would members take their conversations from the floor? Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The REINS Act simply says that Congress must vote on these regulations, these major rules, before they can be enforced on the American people. Essentially, this motion to recommit repeats part of an exclusion already attempted in the McCarthy amendment that the House just voted down. It's purely a political motion. The REINS Act has been the subject of 2 hearings and a markup in the Judiciary Committee and was subject to an additional markup in the Rules Committee. Today we've had a robust debate on the bill and 7 amendments, 5 of which were offered by my colleagues in the minority were on the floor. Congress has a bipartisan bad habit, writing vague legislation that sounds nice but leaves the dirty work to unelected bureaucrats and administrative agencies. This practice has allowed the Congress to claim credit for popular aspects of laws and blame regulatory agencies for increased costs or the otherwise negative effects of the regulations. Agencies are also starting to bypass Congress by writing regulations that stretch the bounds of their delegated authorities. The administration has declared an intent to pursue their agenda by pushing items they could not get through Congress through regulatory actions instead. Indeed, laws that they could not pass in Democratic supermajorities in the last Congress are now being attempted against the will of the Congress to be implemented by regulation. What we've proposed in the REINS Act is very simple. Congress should at the very least be accountable for regulations with $100 million of annual economic impact or more. These rules are classified by the administration as major rules. The REINS Act is not anti-regulation, and it is not pro-regulation. What we're saying is let's have a transparent and accountable process for implementing new regulations. According to a recent Gallup poll, small business owners cited complying with government regulation as the biggest problem facing them today. Public notice did a poll recently that found that a majority of Americans believe Congress should approve regulations before they can be enforced. Our economy is struggling to recover, and more than 13 million Americans are still out of work. Congress needs to do a much better job of creating a pro-growth environment that increases our competitiveness and rewards entrepreneurship and ingenuity. Everyone agrees that regulations can have a significant and detrimental impact on jobs in our economy. Even President Obama described regulations as stifle innovation and have a chilling effect on growth and jobs in an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal earlier this year. The REINS Act lays down a marker to say that Congress should be directly accountable for the most expensive regulations that could stifle innovation and have a chilling effect on growth and jobs. In the words of the great speaker from Cincinnati, Ohio, Nicholas Longworth, I ask all of my colleagues to strike a blow for liberty, to vote for accountability. I oppose the motion to recommit, vote against the motion to recommit, support the REINS Act, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, recorded vote.
Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized. Recorded vote.
Recorded vote, yes.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for electronic vote on the question of passage.
The House this afternoon has been debating a bill that would require congressional approval of certain executive branch regulations. Rosa DeLauro, Democrat of Connecticut, offering the motion to recommit, last chance to change the bill before final passage. After this and the final passage vote, we expect the House to move on to debate on a bill that would ban the sale of certain synthetic drugs. President Obama earlier today in a joint news conference with Stephen Harper, the Canadian Prime Minister, says that he's going to reject any attempt to tie a deal over the controversial Keystone XL oil pipeline to a payroll tax cut extension. The president saying, quote, if the payroll tax cut is attached to a whole bunch of extraneous issues, then it's not something I'm going to accept. Earlier in the day, the president had met with Senate Democratic leadership, in fact saying in those comments with Democratic leaders that he would skip a scheduled vacation in Hawaii if necessary to sign a payroll tax cut extension. After their visit with the president at the White House, the senators came back, held a brief news conference with reporters. We're going to show you as much of that as we can during this 15-minute vote.
Republican leaders have done their best to convince the American public that they support a tax cut for the middle class. McConnell, Boehner, Romney, Gingrich all say they favor extension of the payroll tax cut. They have a funny way of showing it. Obviously, they're having a lot of trouble getting their members to go along with them. Last week, Senate Republicans rebelled against their leadership and rejected their own payroll tax proposal. Today, news reports indicate that the House Republicans are in opposition to this tax cut, and it's thrown the Republican caucus into disarray in the House. I have a simple message for my Republican colleagues. We will make sure we pass this tax cut for the middle class before the end of this year. We're not going to leave town until it's completed. And I say to my Republican colleagues, we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. Republicans can come to the negotiating table. We welcome them, and work with us to forge a compromise that gives the middle class the relief they need to pay their bills and put food on the table. That's the easy way. Or Republicans can continue to squander, valuable time by trying to appease the Tea Party, and sadly, that's what they've done, a lot of appeasing lately. The choice is up to the Republicans. But one thing is certain, I repeat, we're not going to leave town until we pass this tax cut for the middle class. I also want to give the print media some exposure for a change. GOP is split on payroll tax cut. Objections to surtax rich. Opposition could give Obama a 2012 issue. Obama does not need a 2012 issue. The American people do not deserve or need a tax increase. Senator Durbin?
Republicans have tried to brand themselves as the party that wants to cut your taxes. We certainly know that they are loyal to that position when it comes to the wealthiest people in America. They will go to any extreme to stop the wealthiest in America from paying one more penny in taxes. But when it comes to cutting taxes for working families, the Republicans are nowhere to be found. In this circumstance, we clearly know that if we fail to act and reenact the payroll tax cut, it means that working families all across America will see an increase in their payroll taxes. What does it mean in Illinois? The average family makes about $50,000 a year. 2% or 3% turns out to be in the neighborhood of $125 to $150 a month. I've had press conferences in Chicago with these families, many of them struggling paycheck to paycheck. $150 a month may not mean much to some folks in Congress and leaders on the other side, but to the working families across America, it means a lot. It means being able to keep up with high gasoline prices and increased utility bills in the middle of the winter. That's the reality of life for working families. The President made it clear in our meeting in the Oval Office this morning. He is committed to this payroll tax cut for working families across America, and he, as the Majority Leader just said, gave us fair warning. We're staying in Washington until we get that job done. Our holiday gift to American families is not going to be a tax increase.
Thank you, and I want to thank my colleagues. Now, yesterday, Leader McConnell tried again on the Senate floor to convince the media that Republicans actually do support a payroll tax cut. But you'd never know it looking at how they voted last week. Despite his spin, Senator McConnell couldn't get a single other member of his leadership team to vote on his own bill to extend the payroll tax cut. Either Senator McConnell is suddenly a lot less powerful than we thought, or he isn't trying very hard. Senator McConnell should talk to his chief lieutenant, Senator Kyle. Just 24 hours before Senator McConnell claimed Republicans were on board with the payroll tax cut, Senator Kyle gave an extended speech on the Senate floor saying he thought it was a bad idea. In fact, Senator Kyle said the payroll tax should only be extended if the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy are also extended. Does that say where the Republican Party is in a nutshell? They won't help the middle class unless their wealthy friends are helped? Where are their priorities? They're not in sync with America's priorities, and the President's speech yesterday made clear that we Democrats are focused like a laser on the middle class, and that is where the American people want us to be. Now, like Senator McConnell, Speaker Boehner claims Republicans in the House also want to extend the payroll tax cut. But you never know it, considering he had to put off a vote on it until next week because he has a rebellion in his caucus over the issue. This morning, the newspapers told us Speaker Boehner is fighting both the number 2 and number 3 members of his leadership team on this issue. It seems Eric Cantor and Kevin McCarthy only want to extend the payroll tax cut if they get a repatriation holiday for corporations. So let me get this straight. Republicans are willing to let taxes go up on the middle class unless they get a permanent tax cut for those making over $1 million and a big tax cut for corporations with big overseas profits. If that's not class warfare by the Republicans, I don't know what is. And on the tax issue, where Democrats, frankly, have struggled for the last 2 decades, the tides have turned. We're united, we're focused, we're enthusiastic, and they just don't know what to do. Our bill is a compromise. If the Republicans' only dispute on the payroll tax is how it's paid for, our offset is 100% bipartisan. We've taken the millionaire surtax that's supported by Senator Collins of Maine, and we have scaled it back. We've added a bipartisan consensus savings from the super committee, which Leader Murray chaired, dealing with Fannie and Freddie. And we've taken Senator McConnell's own idea to cut off millionaires from collecting unemployment and food stamps. Well, if Republicans can't support this offset, Grover Norquist has come forward with another idea for them. He suggested he would be okay if the tax cut wasn't paid for. Now, we're fine paying for it, but if Republicans keep objecting to every proposed offset, Grover Norquist has given his seal of approval to another method of preventing this tax hike on the middle class. So, when Grover Norquist and the American people are on one side and the Republican leadership is on the other, something's going on here, folks. So, let me repeat what both Leader Reid and Senator Durbin said and what the President told us emphatically at the White House. We're going to stay here as long as it takes to get this done. We'd prefer to negotiate and come up with a bipartisan agreement that includes the tax break for the middle class. But if they won't agree to that, we will stay here to Christmas and even to New Year's to get it done. There's some talk that Speaker Boehner next Wednesday will throw us some kind of proposal and go home. Don't go home, Speaker Boehner, because we're going to be here, and you'll be embarrassed before the American people if you do.
As we head into this holiday season, Republicans have a very simple choice. Do they want to extend the tax cuts that are critical for our middle-class families, or are they going to stand in the way? There are over 160 million middle-class families who are waiting and watching the Republicans for an answer. Last week, Republicans couldn't make up their mind. They said no to our bill, and they said no to their bill. This week, they've been largely silent. But the clock is ticking away, and thousands in savings for middle-class families hangs in the balance. You know, for me personally, this is tough to watch, particularly because of my assignment for the last 3 months. I've gotten a close-up look at what Republicans are willing to do to fight for tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. Their insistence that tax cuts for the rich not be paid for, that they should be made permanent, that they should come at the expense of a balanced plan to address our deficit. But when we raise the issue of tax breaks for our shrinking middle-class families, they're not only nowhere to be found, they actively oppose the idea. That, you know, this is what got us into this mess to begin with, the belief that the only Americans that deserve a tax break are the very wealthy. It's the kind of trickle-down philosophy that failed the middle class and cost us jobs. I have a constituent named Nick Hanauer, and he captured this recently in an op-ed that he wrote for Bloomberg. Nick is a businessman and a venture capitalist in Seattle. He's helped launch more than 20 companies, including Amazon.com. In other words, he is one of those job creators that Republicans like to cite so often. In his op-ed, Nick wrote that it's not tax cuts for the rich that create jobs, but that, quote, only consumers can set in motion a virtuous cycle that allows companies to survive and thrive and business owners to hire. And he says an ordinary middle-class consumer is far more of a job creator than I have ever been or ever will be. His logic is clear. He believes that giving average working families a break and putting more money into their pockets will be what helps spur growth in this country. That's what we're fighting for. Because if we want to create demand and we want to create jobs, we've got to support our middle-class families who are hurting so much this year. That's why we are going to stay here until this gets done.
Oh, Bob, I'm so sorry. This is his bill.
Mr. Leader, thank you very much, and thanks for your great leadership on this. This issue is really about two things in my judgment. Number one, it's about take-home pay. Whether or not the Congress will act by the end of this year to give Americans some peace of mind as they head into the holiday season in a new year. We know this works. There's not any dispute about that. When you cut the payroll tax, you have a positive impact on gross domestic product. And I think it's important to reiterate what our leader said here today, that we are prepared and ready to stay here as long as it takes to work through the holidays to get this done. I spoke to Vice President Biden this morning. He reiterated that as we were talking about the importance of this issue, this tax cut for the American people at this terribly difficult time. I know in our state we've got 500,000 people out of work, more than 500,000. We've got almost 15 million out of work across the country. They need to see us working together to get something done for them, and this is one of the best ways, if not the singular best way to get something done by the end of the year. Secondly, when it comes to the impact this will have, we can emphasize the positive. Let me just talk about the negative. Mark Zandi, and I won't read you all these, Mark Zandi said, quote, "We'd be in recession right now without the payroll tax." And he goes on from there. You talk to any economist, any expert who knows anything about economic growth, if we don't do this, it'll harm growth, and if we do it, it'll have a positive impact on growth. And finally, there's been some questions raised about Social Security. I will submit this letter to the record, but let me just read the operative sentence. This is from Stephen C. Gross, Chief Actuary for the Social Security Administration. He said, and I'm quoting, "We estimate that the projected level of the old age and survivors insurance and disability insurance trust funds will be unaffected by enactment of this provision." So there is no impact on Social Security. Anyone who says that has not read this and is being misleading about this legislation. It's critically important that when Americans go to celebrate the holidays, that they can depend upon in the year 2012 more take-home pay, or at least the take-home pay they had last year from this tax cut.
Yes.
If the House should pass a payroll bill that may include unemployment benefits next week, what elements might make it unacceptable to Democrats in the Senate? And secondly, if the House goes home and you're still here, how does that benefit anybody beyond embarrassing Republicans?
First of all, we'll see what the Republicans send us. I'm not going to be doing some hypothetical thing if they do this or do that. Right now, they can't do anything. So that's where they are. And I don't understand why people, after the last few minutes, can't understand English. We are not going to go home until we finish this. Is it going to be embarrassing to the Republicans, humiliate them? Probably, as it should be, because the American people depend $1,000. This is a lot of money for people to understand that they're going to have an extra $1,000 in a given year. And also, some of that we hear from Republicans, this is great coming from them. Well, this is going to harm Social Security. This is the last year we're going to do this. Everyone knows the Bush tax cuts are gone next year. So we're not going to do it next year. We're doing it this year to maintain the economy that's getting better.
Senator, did the President say he would delay his trip to Hawaii, or did the
On this vote, the ayes are 183, the nays are 235. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Gentleman from Virginia.